A hard-working employee is betrayed by her greedy, manipulative boss after he breaks his promises of a promotion and a life-changing bonus. Fueled by rage and a thirst for justice, she uncovers a trove of incriminating evidence that reveals his empire is built on lies, fraud, and exploitation. With careful planning, she exposes his crimes, topples his career, and leaves his life in ruins. But just when she thinks the nightmare is over, she discovers she's been playing right into his hands. Her revenge sets off a shocking chain of events that flips the script, turning her from the hunter to the hunted. As the truth unravels, she's forced to confront the ultimate question: was her fight for justice worth the price she's now forced to pay? This is a gripping tale of betrayal, retribution, and the unexpected consequences of revenge. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get revenge. If you'd asked anyone who knew me, they'd tell you I was the type to roll with the punches, to brush off life's unfairness and move on. But sometimes, life hits you so hard that you can't just move on, you have to hit back. And that's exactly what I did. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't reckless. It was calculated, deliberate, and, most importantly, justified. It all started with Mr. Ellison. I was thrilled when I first got the job. Fresh out of college with a degree in business administration, I thought working for Ellison Enterprises was my golden ticket. The company had a reputation for being competitive and innovative, and Mr. Ellison himself was a legend in the industry. He was on magazine covers, featured in interviews about the secrets to success, and was always the keynote speaker at conferences. People hung on his every word. And I was no different. At first, Ellison seemed like the kind of boss you'd want to work for: charismatic, confident, the type who could walk into a room and instantly command attention. He was someone you'd want to impress, and I worked harder than I ever had in my life to do just that. I stayed late, volunteered for every project, and made sure my work was always flawless. I wanted to stand out, to prove I was worth investing in. And it seemed to work. Ellison started giving me more responsibilities, bigger projects, and more face time with him directly. When he approached me about leading a high-stakes project for one of the company's biggest clients, I thought my hard work was finally paying off. He called me into his office, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and told me I had what it took to lead the team. "This is a big deal," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "If you can pull this off, you'll be rewarded handsomely. Think bonuses, promotions, the whole package. I see big things for you here." I was elated. My stomach was doing flips, and I barely slept that night, too excited about what this could mean for my career. Over the next 6 months, I poured everything I had into that project. I coordinated with vendors, stayed up late reworking presentations, and handled a team of people who all relied on me to make this project a success. There were nights I didn't even go home. I'd sleep on the office couch and be back at my desk before anyone else showed up in the morning. It paid off. The project launched on time and exceeded every target. It brought in over $2 million in revenue and secured a long-term contract with the client. Ellison was thrilled. He even threw a company-wide celebration, taking credit for the success as if he'd been the one pulling all-nighters and juggling impossible deadlines. But I didn't care. I figured my time to shine would come soon enough. After all, he'd promised me a promotion and a hefty bonus. A week after the celebration, Ellison called me into his office again. I walked in, expecting to leave with a new title and a much larger paycheck. Instead, he handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, confused. "Your reward," he said with a grin. "I know how hard you worked, so I wanted to make sure you got something special." I opened the envelope and found a $500 gift card to a steakhouse. My heart sank. "Is this all?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ellison leaned back in his chair, looking almost amused. "What were you expecting? You're still young, you've got plenty of time to climb the ladder. This is just the beginning for you." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. 6 months of my life, countless sacrifices, and this was his idea of a reward. I forced a smile, nodded, and left his office. But the second I was back at my desk, I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. I wanted to scream, to march back into his office and demand what I was owed. But I didn't. I knew better than to pick a fight I couldn't win, not yet, anyway. Instead, I decided to stay quiet and observe. I watched Ellison more closely than ever, noticing the little things I'd ignored before. Like how he always made sure to take the credit for other people's work in meetings. Or how he seemed to favor the employees who flattered him over the ones who actually got things done. And then there were the rumors, whispers about how he'd screwed over previous employees, how he manipulated contracts to squeeze more money out of clients, and how he always seemed to come out on top, no matter who he had to step on to get there. The more I learned, the more I realized that Ellison wasn't the brilliant businessman everyone thought he was. He was a fraud. His success wasn't built on hard work or innovation, it was built on lies, manipulation, and exploitation. And suddenly, I didn't just want revenge for myself. I wanted to bring him down for everyone he'd ever cheated. It wasn't until a few months later that I found my opportunity. I was working late one night. Ellison had assigned me another impossible deadline and then conveniently disappeared to go golfing for the weekend. I was digging through some files on the company's shared drive when I stumbled across a folder labeled Private. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it, but it was password protected. For a moment, I hesitated. If I got caught trying to access it, it could cost me my job. But then I thought about all the hours I'd worked, all the sacrifices I'd made, and all the empty promises Ellison had fed me. I deserved to know what he was hiding. I tried a few passwords, starting with the obvious ones, Ellison, 12345, and password. Nothing worked. Then I remembered his dog, Bentley. He loved that dog more than anything, constantly showing off pictures of him at the office. I typed in Bentley. The folder unlocked. What I found inside changed everything. There were years of fraudulent documents, fake invoices, falsified expense reports, and emails discussing ways to cut corners on projects without clients noticing. There were even 2 sets of accounting records, one that he showed to investors and the IRS, and another that revealed the company's actual finances. It was a goldmine of incriminating evidence, enough to destroy Ellison's career and maybe even land him in prison. I should have been shocked, but honestly, I wasn't. It all made sense now, the rumors, the favoritism, the way he always seemed to stay one step ahead. Ellison wasn't a genius. He was a con artist. And I was holding the proof in my hands. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment I could finally get justice, not just for myself but for everyone Ellison had ever wronged. But I couldn't just throw everything out into the open. If I acted rashly, he'd find a way to weasel out of it, just like he always did. No, I needed a plan. A meticulous, foolproof plan to take him down. And this time, I wasn't going to play fair. The days following my discovery were a blur of sleepless nights and meticulous planning. I couldn't rush this. If I wanted to bring Ellison down, I needed to do it in a way that left no room for him to maneuver. He was a master manipulator, and if I slipped up even slightly, he'd find a way to spin things in his favor. No, this had to be perfect. I started by copying the entire folder of incriminating files onto a flash drive. I made sure to encrypt it with my own password, one far less obvious than Bentley. Then I created multiple backups, storing them on cloud services under fake accounts and even emailing one to myself just in case. If Ellison somehow caught wind of what I was doing, I wasn't about to let him erase my evidence. Once I had everything secured, I moved on to the next step, understanding his vulnerabilities. The fraudulent documents were powerful, but they were just one piece of the puzzle. I needed to figure out how to leverage them in a way that would cause maximum damage. To do that, I had to think like him, greedy, calculated, and completely ruthless. The first thing I did was dig into the company's upcoming merger with Convergence Corporation, a larger rival that Ellison had been courting for months. The merger was his golden ticket, a deal that would make him one of the wealthiest and most respected CEOs in the industry. It was all he talked about in meetings, bragging about how he'd managed to outsmart Convergence's executives into giving him the better end of the deal. It didn't take long to realize just how much Ellison was betting on this merger. If it fell through, his company's stock would plummet, his investors would pull out, and his carefully constructed empire would begin to collapse. That was when the pieces started to fall into place. I decided to make the merger my first target. But I couldn't stop there. I wanted to make sure Ellison's downfall was complete, that he didn't just lose the merger but his reputation, his wealth, and the smug sense of invincibility he carried everywhere he went. I wanted him to feel powerless, the same way he'd made me and countless others feel. And the only way to do that was to destroy him on every front, professionally, legally, and personally. Ellison's carelessness was my greatest asset. Despite his cutthroat persona, he had a massive ego and a tendency to underestimate people. He never bothered to put real safeguards in place because he didn't think anyone had the guts to challenge him. And while he played the part of a charming businessman to perfection, he wasn't nearly as disciplined as he wanted people to believe. He had habits, routines, and weaknesses, all of which I exploited. For one, he loved delegating the dirty work. He never sent the fraudulent emails himself, instead, he instructed lower-level employees to do it on his behalf. Most of them didn't even realize they were committing fraud, they just thought they were following orders. But his arrogance had led him to keep detailed email chains outlining exactly what he wanted done. And thanks to his sloppy filing system, I now had all of them. Then there was his obsession with status. Ellison couldn't resist showing off his wealth, which often made him reckless with money. He used company funds to pay for personal expenses, from first-class vacations to luxury watches, then disguised them as business development costs. Those records were in the folder, too, clear as day. It was almost laughable how obvious some of the transactions were. Finally, there was his personal life. Ellison was married with 2 teenage kids, but everyone in the office knew he wasn't exactly loyal. He had a mistress, a younger woman named Lisa, who worked for one of the company's vendors. I'd overheard him on the phone with her more than once, making plans to meet at the usual place or whispering sweet nothings like a lovesick teenager. I didn't care about his private affairs, but I knew it could be useful if I needed leverage later on. Once I had all the pieces, I began laying the groundwork for my plan. The first step was to bring Convergence Corporation into the fold. I created an anonymous email account and attached a selection of the most damning documents from Ellison's folder. These included evidence of fraudulent invoices and shady accounting practices, along with a few emails that made it clear Ellison had been lying about the company's financial stability. I wrote a concise message, pretending to be a whistleblower who just wanted to do the right thing. To whom it may concern. I thought you should know that Ellison Enterprises has been falsifying financial records and engaging in fraudulent practices. Attached are documents that prove this. I hope you'll reconsider any dealings with them before it's too late. Best regards, a concerned citizen. I sent the email to Convergence's legal team, making sure to route it through a VPN so it couldn't be traced back to me. Then I waited. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Within a week, rumors started circulating in the office that the merger was in trouble. Convergence had called for an emergency meeting to reevaluate the terms of the deal. Ellison was livid. I heard him screaming at his assistant one morning, demanding to know what was going on and who had leaked confidential information. He had no idea it was me. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my plan involved the media. I carefully curated another batch of documents, this time focusing on Ellison's misuse of company funds and his habit of cutting corners on projects to maximize profits. I reached out to a journalist at a major business magazine who had a reputation for exposing corporate scandals. I sent him the files anonymously, along with a tip about Ellison's pending merger troubles. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist digging deeper. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, the story broke. The headline read, "Ellison Enterprises Under Fire, Fraud, Financial Misconduct, and a CEO in Crisis." The article laid out everything: how Ellison had cheated clients, falsified records, and embezzled funds for his personal gain. It even hinted at problems in his personal life, though the journalist didn't have enough proof to go into detail. Yet, the reaction was immediate and brutal. Investors began pulling out, and clients started canceling contracts. The company's stock price plummeted, losing nearly 40% of its value in just 3 days. Ellison was in full damage control mode, giving press conferences and issuing statements about how the accusations were baseless and the company was committed to transparency. But the evidence was too strong, and the damage had already been done. Watching it all unfold was exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control, like I wasn't just some powerless employee being pushed around by someone who thought he was untouchable. I was the one pulling the strings now, and Ellison had no idea who was behind it. But there was still one more move to make. With the media frenzy in full swing and Ellison's empire teetering, I shifted my focus to the final stages of my plan. Up until now, I'd hit him professionally, tarnishing his name and shredding his reputation in the business world. But it wasn't enough. Ellison still had his money, his mansion, and his smug sense of superiority. He could recover, rebuild, and come back if I didn't take everything from him. I was about to deliver the finishing blow. The fallout from the media exposé was worse than I could have imagined, for Ellison, at least. His attempts to defend himself were weak and half-hearted. Every statement he issued was immediately contradicted by the mountain of evidence I had leaked. Analysts on TV debated whether the company could even survive the scandal, with some speculating that bankruptcy was inevitable. Employees were nervous, whispering in break rooms about layoffs and wondering how much longer the company could stay afloat. Meanwhile, Ellison became a ghost in his own office. He stopped strutting around like he owned the place, no longer greeting people with that infuriating fake smile of his. Instead, he hid in his office, barking orders to his assistant and furiously working the phones in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. I overheard him on more than one occasion, yelling at his legal team and swearing about ungrateful employees and witch hunts. But none of that stopped him from living lavishly. Despite the chaos, Ellison continued driving his luxury cars, flaunting his designer suits, and posting pictures on social media from his sprawling mansion. He still acted like he was untouchable, as if his wealth would protect him from the storm. And maybe it would have, if I hadn't known where his skeletons were buried. The next step was to hit him financially. Remember the fraudulent accounting records I found? They showed exactly how Ellison had been funneling company money into his personal accounts and disguising it as business expenses. Trips to the Maldives, custom suits, high-end jewelry, and, of course, his prized Bentley, it was all there, itemized and undeniable. I knew that if this information made its way to the IRS, it would be game over. I spent hours compiling everything into a detailed report. I included screenshots of the transactions, emails approving the false expenses, and even his personal notes from meetings where he'd instructed employees to be creative with the books. I attached the report to an anonymous tip and sent it directly to the IRS's whistleblower program. But I didn't stop there. Ellison's accounts showed that a significant amount of his money was stashed in offshore accounts, likely to avoid taxes. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the names of the shell companies he'd created with the accounts in the fraudulent documents. Sure enough, I found a trail leading to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The transactions were shady at best, and I knew they'd catch the attention of investigators. To make sure the pressure was unbearable, I sent the offshore account details to a few key reporters. I knew the media would eat it up, especially after the initial exposé. Sure enough, within days, the headlines shifted from corporate fraud to tax evasion and offshore accounts. The IRS officially opened an investigation, and the media swarmed him like vultures on a dying animal. Ellison couldn't spin his way out of this one. The real fireworks started when his investors decided they'd had enough. One morning, I walked into the office and found the mood heavier than usual. No one was working, they were all glued to their phones, whispering in hushed tones. A coworker pulled me aside and told me the news: Ellison's biggest investors were suing him for fraud. Apparently, they'd been watching the chaos unfold and decided they couldn't risk being dragged down with him. They claimed Ellison had lied about the company's financial health to secure their funding, a claim backed up by the very documents I had leaked. The lawsuits demanded not only their initial investments but also damages, interest, and legal fees. The company's accounts were frozen almost immediately, leaving Ellison scrambling to cover costs. Payroll checks bounced, vendors refused to deliver supplies, and clients started terminating their contracts. The once bustling office felt like a sinking ship, with employees jumping at the first opportunity to leave. Ellison was cornered, but I wasn't done. The final stage of my plan was personal. I had no intention of going after his family, they were innocent in all of this, but Ellison himself. He had to lose everything. That's where Lisa, his mistress, came into play. I didn't want to involve her at first. She wasn't the one who had wronged me, and I didn't care about his private affairs. But then I stumbled across something in one of the email chains I'd saved. Lisa wasn't just his mistress, she was also complicit in some of the fraud. There were emails between her and Ellison discussing how to inflate invoices from her company to siphon more money into his accounts. She was in on it. That changed everything. I created another anonymous email, this time addressed to Ellison's wife. I attached copies of the emails between him and Lisa, highlighting the parts that showed both their affair and the fraudulent transactions. I kept the message short and simple. Mrs. Ellison, I thought you deserved to know the truth. Attached are emails that prove your husband has been unfaithful and has used your family's company for illegal activity. Do what you feel is right. Best regards, a friend. I sent the email late on a Friday night, knowing she'd have the entire weekend to sit with it. By Monday, the office was in chaos. Word had spread that Mrs. Ellison had filed for divorce and was demanding a significant portion of his assets. Apparently, she'd also taken their kids and moved into a hotel, leaving Ellison alone in his mansion. But the real kicker? She'd started cooperating with investigators, providing additional evidence to help the IRS and the investors' lawyers build their cases against him. Ellison was completely isolated. His company was collapsing, his reputation was in shambles, and now he was losing his family and fortune. The man who once seemed untouchable was now a broken shell, desperately trying to keep his head above water. The day he finally cracked was one I'll never forget. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to work, when I heard shouting coming from Ellison's office. His assistant ran out in tears, and moments later, Ellison stormed out, his face red with fury. He stood in the middle of the office, glaring at everyone like a caged animal. "You're all useless," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you think this company runs itself? Do you think I got here by being lazy? I built this. Me. And this is how I'm repaid. By a bunch of cowards and backstabbers." No one said a word. He stormed back into his office, slamming the door behind him. Less than an hour later, security guards arrived and escorted him out of the building. The board had voted to remove him as CEO, effective immediately. Ellison Enterprises was finished. And so was he. I didn't celebrate that day, but I did feel a sense of satisfaction. For once, justice had been served, not by some higher power or blind luck, but by me. I had taken back control, piece by piece, and made sure Ellison paid for every lie, every betrayal, and every drop of sweat he'd stolen from me and countless others. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about balance. And for the first time in years, the scales felt even. In the weeks following Ellison's public downfall, life felt quiet. The company was dissolved, its assets sold off to pay debts and lawsuits. Ellison himself disappeared from the public eye, becoming a cautionary tale whispered about in industry circles. His mansion went on the market, his cars repossessed, and his wife, now armed with a formidable legal team, had left him with little more than his name, and even that was tarnished beyond repair. I should have felt triumphant. After all, I'd done the impossible, I had brought down a man who seemed untouchable. But instead of feeling victorious, there was an itch I couldn't scratch, a nagging feeling that something was off. It was hard to explain. Maybe it was the eerie silence that followed the chaos, or maybe it was the lingering thought that someone as cunning as Ellison wouldn't go down without a final move. And I was right. It all started with a voicemail. I was at home, lounging on the couch and scrolling through job listings. While I had enough money from the severance I'd taken from Ellison's offshore accounts, I wasn't planning to live off it forever. I wanted to start fresh, but I hadn't yet decided what that fresh start would look like. That's when my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a recruiter or maybe a friend checking in. Instead, the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. "Hello, you don't know me, but I know what you did to Mr. Ellison." My breath caught in my throat. The voice was calm, deliberate, and untraceable. "Don't worry," the man continued. "I'm not here to blackmail you. In fact, I respect what you did. But I think it's only fair that you know, you weren't the only one playing the game." The voicemail ended abruptly, leaving me frozen in place. My mind raced. Who was this? How did they know what I'd done? And what did they mean, I wasn't the only one playing the game? The next day, I received an unmarked package at my doorstep. Inside was a single USB drive. No note, no explanation, just the drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop, my curiosity outweighing my fear. What I found was a folder of surveillance videos. The first clip showed me sitting in the office late at night, the same night I discovered Ellison's private folder. The camera angle was from the ceiling, and it captured everything, me guessing the password, copying files onto my flash drive, and even the satisfied smirk on my face when I'd succeeded. My stomach dropped. The second clip was worse. It showed me transferring the six-figure bonus from one of Ellison's offshore accounts into my own. I remembered the moment clearly, I justified it at the time as payment for what he owed me. But seeing it on video made it feel much more damning. And the third clip? That was the most chilling of all. It wasn't surveillance footage. It was a professionally recorded interview. With Mr. Ellison. I hit play, my heart pounding. Ellison sat in a dimly lit room, looking disheveled but oddly composed. The interviewer, whose face was never shown, asked him about the scandal, the lawsuits, and the fallout from the media exposé. "They think I'm finished," Ellison said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "They think they've destroyed me. But what people don't understand is that I'm always 2 steps ahead." The interviewer chuckled. "Are you saying this was all part of a larger plan?" Ellison smirked, his confidence oddly intact. "Not all of it, no. I didn't see everything coming. But when I realized what was happening, I decided to turn it to my advantage. You see, people love a redemption story. Give it time, and I'll come out on top again. But first, I need to tie up a few loose ends." The interviewer leaned forward, their voice lowering. "And what about the person who exposed you? The one who sent those documents to the press and the IRS?" Ellison's smirk widened. "Oh, I know exactly who they are. And don't worry, I've already put the wheels in motion to deal with them." I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. He knew. The next few days were a waking nightmare. I started noticing things, small, unsettling things that made my skin crawl. A black car parked outside my apartment for hours. My mail arriving opened and resealed. Anonymous calls that hung up the moment I answered. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the signs were too clear to ignore. Then came the first official blow: my bank account was frozen. I called the bank, panicking, only to be told that an investigation had been launched into suspicious activity. Apparently, someone had reported me for money laundering. The funds I'd transferred from Ellison's offshore account were flagged, and now I was being treated like a criminal. The second blow came a week later when I received a subpoena in the mail. Ellison was suing me. The lawsuit claimed that I had stolen sensitive company information and embezzled funds, and it demanded not only the return of the money but also damages. The irony was almost laughable, Ellison accusing me of theft. But the lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about sending a message: he wasn't going to let me walk away unscathed. I knew I couldn't fight him alone. I needed legal help, but hiring a lawyer wasn't cheap, especially with my accounts frozen. I reached out to a few old coworkers, hoping someone would back me up, but most of them wanted nothing to do with the situation. They were too afraid of getting dragged into Ellison's mess. In the end, I found an attorney willing to take my case on a contingency basis. She believed me when I told her the truth about Ellison and promised to do everything she could to protect me. But even with her help, the battle was draining. Court dates, depositions, endless paperwork, it consumed my life. And then came the final twist. A few months into the lawsuit, my attorney uncovered something shocking. During discovery, she obtained emails that revealed Ellison had known about my plans to expose him long before the media did. In fact, he'd encouraged it. The emails were between Ellison and a private investigator he'd hired. They showed that Ellison had intentionally left the private folder on the shared drive, knowing I'd find it. The documents were real, but they were only part of the story. By leaking them, I had unknowingly played into his hands. The exposé, the lawsuits, the media frenzy, it had all been part of a calculated move. Ellison had used me to clean house, getting rid of investors and clients who'd been liabilities, while positioning himself as a victim of corporate sabotage. Now, with the lawsuits against me, he was setting the stage for his comeback. I was a pawn in his game all along. The realization hit me like a freight train. Ellison had orchestrated everything, turning my revenge into a weapon he could wield against his enemies, and against me. He didn't just survive my plan, he thrived because of it. I had destroyed his empire, yes, but I had also cleared the way for him to rebuild. And as much as I hated to admit it, he had won.